What's going on, everybody? Aidan from Birds vs. Boys here, recapping Week 6. Eagles at Jets. Eagles fall 20-14 in what was an absolute disaster. It was a brutal watch from a football standpoint. If you're a fan of neither of those teams, I would suggest not watching that. I assume it wasn't on Red Zone very much because for a long portion, we did not make it to the Red Zone and neither did the Jets. It was not a fun game to watch. It wasn't exciting that much until the end with the chaos that ensued there. So let's start with the end because I think it was a microcosm of the entire game for the Eagles and just bad, ugly football. So 2 minutes left. The Jets have no timeouts left. If the Eagles convert 3rd and 9, they win the game. But if they don't convert and the clock is still running, the Jets would have to go the length of the field for a field goal to win with about 1:15 left and no timeouts. So you would expect QB draw. You don't. You get an interception. Jalen Hurts, the tight end, was double covered. I don't know what he saw on that throw. He makes the throw anyway, so that's one. And then you tackle the person who intercepts the ball, even though you could have avoided that, let them score, and get the ball back. So for some reason, they did that. And then to compound it, on the flip side, for the Jets, for some reason, they decided to score when the Eagles were letting them score and give the Eagles the ball back with 1:46 left and 2 timeouts. It was just bad, ugly football. That play sequence was a summation of the entire day where you didn't get the best and brightest of the NFL this day. It wasn't great. It wasn't fun to watch, especially as an Eagles fan, but just in general as a football fan, it was pretty much a disaster. The Eagles did not score for the final 3 quarters. They were up 14-9 at halftime. They didn't score in the second half. On the first 2 plays coming out of halftime, they had a 13-yard gain and an 11-yard gain. A nice screen to Dallas Goedert that they went back to after it didn't work on the interception. And then a run for DeAndre Swift of 11 yards. And that was the last time I feel like they had momentum that whole day of like stringing plays together. Aside from the A.J. Brown deep shot, I just don't remember a time when they were like really stringing things together. The turnover battle was obviously the biggest issue. I think there's short-term things and long-term things you saw today that would concern you, or in the long term. Short term, you're like, all right, this is amendable. The only way that the Jets could stay in this game, because they don't possess the firepower on offense that the Eagles do, especially with the quarterback position, that the only way they could stay in the game is if they won the turnover battle. They won it 4-0. It provided them short fields where they were able to hit field goals, keep themselves in the game, and keep the Eagles from not scoring. It felt like the Eagles should have been up 21-3 at halftime. And then they went on to turn the ball over 2 more times after that. At the end of the half, they were going through their 2-minute drill, 2-minute offense. They're already at the 50-yard line after a personal foul roughing the passer on Jalen Hurts. Gets them to the 50. Throws it to DeAndre Swift. You're already at the 42 if he doesn't fumble the ball. You're going in, you're getting points before halftime, and you're getting the ball to start the second half. Instead, the Jets go the other way, and they get a field goal at the end of the half to go 14-9. It was just a disaster in terms of turnovers. Will this team turn the ball over 4 times every game? No. I think we'll talk about next week, but I think this is a refocus point. So short term, that's just something. It can't happen. It did, but it's amendable. And sometimes it's just not your day. Like when Jake Elliott misses a 37-yard field goal after being the most reliable kicker in Eagles history and not have been missed all the entire year. Yeah, it's bad. It wasn't a fun time. It was just one of those things where it's not your day. And that's a short-term thing. Those are a short-term fix. But when it comes to the long-term fixes, Lane Johnson being out could be an absolute disaster. The MRI takes place tomorrow. It's probably, I mean, we all saw the replay. It's an ankle sprain. We'll see the severity of it. But if you're an Eagles fan, it's pretty well documented that you kind of know how this has gone while he's been injured and how they perform when he's out of the game. They do a total 180 on offense to the point that you can suggest that Lane Johnson is worse to lose than Jalen Hurts. You saw last year with a backup quarterback, Gardner Minshew was able to put up 34 on the road at Dallas. And while it would obviously be horrible to lose Jalen Hurts, you can make the case that losing Lane Johnson is just as brutal for this team. They are 13-22 all time when they don't have them. Going back to Carson Wentz's rookie year, they were 3-0. He gets a 10-game suspension, and they go 1-9 after that point. 1-9. So this has just been a thing that's been well documented over the course of his career. They do not perform well when he is out of the lineup. And I'm assuming if it's a high ankle sprain, he's probably going to be out of the lineup for quite some time. I think that'll be huge. I think, again, this team is still really good. Everything went wrong today. They knew it. As soon as the game ended, everybody in the locker room was talking about accountability and about how they didn't play well. Devontae Smith talking about catching the ball. Things like that can be fixed. I think as bad as the offense looked, these are amendable situations. I thought they got too aggressive on offense with the two corners out and Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed. So they're trying to be aggressive. They're trying to throw the ball a lot and kind of attack those young corners. And they did, but at the same time, then it creates a 45-22 balance where you're not running the ball. You didn't have DeAndre Swift involved, and you had no flow and no rhythm on offense. Those are correctable things. Jack Driscoll at right tackle, there's no correctable thing to that. That was a disaster today. It created a lot of pressure on Jalen Hurts and made him almost indecisive and unsure of himself. It seemed like he was bailing out of the pocket a lot again, which is what you saw from him in like 2021 in the season where they went 9-8 and heavily relied on the running game because they didn't trust him as a passer. That's really what you were seeing from him tonight. Is just like a guy who didn't seem unsure of himself as a passer, who was under a lot of pressure and bailing out of the pocket because of it. It's hard to blame him in this case because, again, Jack Driscoll just didn't have it today. As soon as Lane Johnson went out of the game, that back half of the game was just a disaster. We're not used to seeing that. We're used to like a 7-8 minute drive that seals the game. When it was 14-12 and they got the ball back with about 10 to 12 minutes left in the fourth quarter, you're used to the Eagles just going down, putting together a 14-play drive, take 6-7 minutes off the clock. They put points on the board and it kind of seals that game. And you're like, all right, defense just has to get one more stop and we're out of here. That didn't happen today. And I think a lot of that is just not having Lane Johnson on that line and in that lineup. It was pretty brutal. And it was one of the first times that we remember and seeing the Eagles like kind of, getting pressure with the offensive line, like not looking good and looking shaky. And it was very evident when they didn't have that like shutdown. I call it the fuck you drive, where it's like, yeah, we're going to run it. You know what we're about to do. It's going to be a 7 to 8 minute drive and we're going to score and there's nothing you can do and the game's going to be over. Looking forward to the Dallas-Philly matchup. Should be a good one. It should be a really good matchup. I'm interested to see how the Cowboys game goes tomorrow because I have seen the story of the Chargers one too many times. I feel like that game will be close into the fourth quarter, and then the Chargers blow it. So this was another game. What's tough about the Eagles situation is they could have had a 2-game lead in the division if they would have won today. And the 49ers lost to the Browns, so you are up and the only undefeated left, so you'd be in charge of the 1 seed there too. So losing this game ahead of what's going to be a really tough stretch, including that Dallas-Philly matchup, is really tough. Again, I think this will be a good thing in a way. We'll talk about injuries here in a second, but I think this kind of refocuses the team. They all talked about it after the game. They have the standard is the standard. That was not the standard. That was bad. Professor Powers, what a guy, right? That's hilarious. Yeah, I'm so glad that you have him for class. He's it's so funny, him as a professor and him as a teacher, totally different thing. So shout out to SJU Professor Powers. Thanks for him putting you on the show. I'm glad you're watching. And I also sat in his class one time and it was hilarious seeing your dad as like a teacher and how he was able to engage the class and with the reports and everything like that. So funny. So back to the Eagles here. The problem that I see going forward is what we talked about the day after the Super Bowl. Like we literally did a show the day after the Super Bowl and we said, it's easy to be like, yeah, this team is talented. They'll get back. They have Jalen Hurts in his prime. They have AJ Brown in his prime. Devontae Smith is young. All these guys are young in their core. But it isn't taken to the fact the injury luck that they had last year where the same 22 guys who started the season finished starting in the Super Bowl. That has not been the case so far this year, and you can tell the impact that it has. Now, I think the defense did an awesome job today. Now, they're playing Zach Wilson. It's going to be a lot different when you go against the Dolphins team next week. That's for sure. A little bit different when they're putting up 40, 50, 70 sometimes, the motion that they run with their offense, the firepower that they have. The defensive line today was awesome. Hassan Reddick told us, he was like, now that I have this cast off, I feel like a different person. He now has 4.5 sacks in 3 weeks since getting that cast off. So yeah, I think he looks good. Jordan Davis continues to impress me. They had to rely on him a lot because at one point Milton Williams got hurt. Obviously, Jalen Carter was out today. So I think it'll be a little bit tough going forward with the injuries. And the big thing I'm looking at is the secondary. I think the defensive line was awesome, and it bailed out the secondary from what could have been a brutal day if you were playing a better quarterback than Zach Wilson and if you were playing Tua and the Dolphins next week. You look at the secondary, I love this team to death. Does this room that I'm in kind of give you that perception with all the Eagles gear behind me? I love this team. I follow them religiously. There was a point in the second half where I didn't know who was in the game in the secondary. You came into the game and Darius Slay was hurt. Obviously, Avonte Maddox is on IR. Sidney Brown didn't play again today. Eli Ricks went out of the game. Reed Blankenship went out of the game. They put Justin Reed on IR this week. Am I missing anybody? It was crazy. It was crazy. They had nobody left. There were people that I didn't know their names that were playing in the secondary. If that is going to happen long term, I'm very concerned. Now, the Darius Slay thing, I think that he'll be back next week. I'm hoping he'll be back next week. I hope Jalen Carter is back next week. So that's where I'm at in this point right now, where it's like, if Reed Blankenship's okay, another point in that game where it's just like, what are we doing? Where the Eagles had the offsides, they give the free play, the Jets get a first down, and then Alan Lazard with the crackback block, which was just so dumb, just so dumb, puts them in a second 25, but they lose Reed on that play. All right, so safety, not a deep position to begin with. They lose Reed Blankenship, and Justin Reed was put on IR this week. It's just like, if he's okay and Darius Slay comes back, I feel good. But that secondary that I saw out there today, getting ready for this gauntlet of 5 to 6 games, that is going to be the difference between them being successful and them getting torched for 40 points. It's a weird kind of seesaw that we're on. I feel very confident that they are going to beat the Dolphins next week. The debut of Kelly Green jerseys, Sunday Night Football, the refocus that this game will allow this team to have. I think they realize how badly they screwed up today, how they gave this game away, and just gave short positions and short fields to Zach Wilson to allow the Jets to have field goals and really keep them in this game when they had no business being in this game. I think that will allow them to refocus. It's a little bit tougher to refocus if nobody in your secondary is even close to a household name. It was pretty much James Bradbury, who's been out earlier this year, and a bunch of guys that we have never heard of before, and Josh Jobe getting targeted again and again and again and attacked just like we saw in weeks past. Bradley Roby also went out today. I knew I was forgetting somebody, but it was that type of day where they're down 7 to 8 members in the secondary. So if they're healthy in the secondary come next week and come this next month, I'm still very, very confident in this team. They're still a really, really good team. But days like today, when you look out there and you're like, shit, who is this person? Like, I don't even know who's on the field right now. And it's like a team that you follow on a day-to-day basis. If that's the case, then I get to be a little worried. So short term, I think, you know what? They had a day where everything went wrong. And that's going to happen in the NFL. That's the parody of the NFL. Sometimes you're undefeated and you lose to PJ Walker and Zach Wilson. It happens. It does. But I just think health continues to be my main focus. I think I've talked about it on every show, every preview for the season we talked about. Since the last Super Bowl, we talked about it. Like, the one chance this team has getting back to the Super Bowl is maintaining health within this core. It hasn't happened with the secondary so far this year, and it's a cause for concern going forward if that keeps up and they're down guys. But I do think there's going to be guys coming back, Slay, Jalen Carter. That makes me feel a little bit better, and we'll be all right. Just looking at some other notes from the game before we wrap up here. There was a 19-play drive in the first half where they scored their first touchdown. The utilization of the guys on that drive I thought was very creative. They had Devontae Smith coming out of the backfield where he got matched up with a linebacker, and he got a 7-yard gain. Awesome. They ran a play similar. They had Dallas Goedert coming out of the backfield. Creative. Awesome. They ran like a triple option kind of look where they got Boston Scott the ball on third down for a gain of 16. Really innovative, creative play calling. Where did that go the rest of the game? Was it because Lane Johnson was out? Or were they just like so scatterbrained with him being out and just like not being able to get in a rhythm that they never went back to it? On that 19-play drive, yeah, Hurts bailed him out with his legs a few times, but I thought there was some creative play calling, some plays that we hadn't seen before in terms of scheme from this team. And then all of a sudden, like, it went away. They never had a sustained drive from that on that. Devontae Smith, I don't think I've ever seen him drop a ball before, and this is just the kind of day it was. 2 big drops, and it's just that's frustrating because the one, I don't think there was anybody within 10 yards of him when he made that drop. So it's just one of those things where we got to clean up the easy stuff. If we're not going to have health on our side, you got to clean up the easy stuff. This has got to be like, if you're sure hands, be sure hands. If you like the DeAndre Swift fumbling that ball at the end of the half, it can't happen. These things can't happen. It's the fine margin between winning and losing against like teams like the Jets because they can't sustain drives. They can't go 75 yards and score touchdowns. The only way that they can is if you give them short fields and you turn the ball over, which they did 4 times. The defense bailed them out of that for the majority of the game, but couldn't do so on the final interception. So I think there's people that are concerned about the play calling. For me, I really can't tell if it was the play calling or if they just got like I said, just like scatterbrained when Lane Johnson went out and they didn't know what to do, and Jack Driscoll needed help and he was just getting blown by and he was a turnstile. And I think it messed up their game plan and they never recovered. Having a week to prep without Lane Johnson, that will help. There's no replacement. There's no amount of practice that's going to help if he's out for this next month or 4 to 6 weeks with a high ankle sprain. But at least today, I feel a little bit like this was part of that. And going forward, I think if Devontae Smith, who's sure-handed, catches the ball on 2 of those plays and DeAndre Swift doesn't fumble, you're going to be in situations where you feel a little bit better about this offense, because I think a lot of people right now are criticizing the play calling and criticizing Jalen Hurts a little bit. I think that'll be fine. I am confident going into next week. All I care about is the injuries right now. So, like I said, looking forward, today was not your day. You should have known it at certain points. For me, it was the Jake Elliott field goal was missed. That was when I was like, yeah, it's just not going to happen today. So I look forward, and I'm pretty confident in beating the Dolphins next week. It will depend on the injury report every single day this week. It depends on who's out there on the field. Listen, if Slay's not out there and Blankenship's not out there and you don't get some of these guys back in the secondary, it's going to be a long day against Waddle and Hill. But I do think that this is a good football team. They are a mentally tough football team. They realized how bad today went and what a disaster it was. And it kind of refocuses and resets them. It reminds me of last year in the Commanders game on Monday Night Football when everything went wrong. They lost the turnover battle. They had no business losing that game to the Commanders. It was a late penalty that did it and a few turnovers that were momentum shifting plays. And what happened? They bounced back from it. They realized how poorly they played. They realized they lost the turnover battle. It completely changed them. So I think you're going to see something similar. But again, I'm just worried about Lane Johnson. I'm worried about the injuries in general. If I was the Giants and the Jets, I'd be raising hell about the MetLife turf, but that's for another day. So I feel like this was an awful day. Let's focus on baseball. Let's get it back Sunday night against the Dolphins. It's okay. Losses happen. Shitty days happen. Everything goes wrong. The sky is falling, and it can for now, but it doesn't mean the sky is falling for the rest of the year. Just get healthy. So we'll be back. We're going to be talking this week about that Dolphins game. Birds versus boys. So we'll be reacting to the Monday Night Football Cowboys game as well, and their upcoming schedule and everything going on in the league. Because I think it was a hectic week and there was a lot of different injuries, not just with the Eagles, but around the league that are kind of shift everything. So we'll talk about it then, and we'll be back this week. We'll talk to you soon. Just a brutal fucking day. Brutal.